I think the number one thing that you have to ask yourself deep inside before starting is, am I really passionate about this? Is this something I am willing to live, sleep, dream? And if the answer is yes, then you take the next step and it's something I've had to learn. So what I would say is I went into this not understanding this at all, but thinking it was important and really wanting to do it. But as it grew, and I grew with this business, what I recognize is not everyone succeeds. And the metric of success has to be very personal.
We're excited to welcome you back to another episode of the Med Creator 101 podcast. I'm Dr. Dustin Portela, a board-certified dermatologist and medical content creator. And I am joined, as always, by Mimi Banks, the founder of MB Social and my co-host.
Today, we are here with Dr. Clare Bertuccio, radiation oncologist and the CEO and Chief Medical Officer of Medicine Mama. With over 30 years of experience, Dr. Bertuccio's commitment to women's health is transforming care and resonating powerfully across social media. Welcome to Med Creator 101, Dr. Clare.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much.
We're happy to have you. Before we start, we always like to get to know our guests a little bit personally. Are you open to answering a few questions?
Yes.
Okay, so the first one, we haven't asked this before, but do you have a childhood nickname that you go by?
Well, my brothers and sisters used to call me Clare Bear, but otherwise, no, it's just my parents actually gave us all of us one syllable names because they didn't like nicknames. So we all got one syllable names for the least possibility of nicknaming.
Childhood trauma from getting made fun of?
I don't know. Yeah.
Dustin, do you have one?
No, I never really had a nickname. Nothing really stuck with Dustin.
When I was younger, the childhood trauma, people would say, who, I, she, if I would say Mimi. And like as a young kid, when you get your name made fun of, you don't love it.
Yeah, I think maybe that's where my mom was coming from. She had a one-syllable name, though, too, Jane. So I don't know where it all started.
Now my friends use it. My full name is Miriam, so they use that to be ironic more so. So like my real name has become my nickname. But something a little bit closer to your heart, not at all geared towards you, Dustin, but pads, tampons, or menstrual cups?
Well, I think it's a great question. I'm glad that discussion is out there. I think it's also a very personal question. What the person feels most comfortable with. And so I think, again, it's a very personal question. Some people don't like tampons because they've heard stories about potential toxins and such. And a lot of people move to menstrual cups because of that. And they think maybe it's more natural, better for the planet because you don't have the same amount of waste. Pads, some people think they're messy, uncomfortable, definitely have a role in certain situations where a tampon would not be appropriate use. Postpartum, for example, they really want to keep things sterile. You're restricted from intravaginal insertions of many kinds postpartum for a certain amount of time. So I think we're lucky that in this day and age, we actually have those choices and have the ability to choose and maybe tailor to our specific situation, different times in our lives, different situations for a choice.
This is TMI. I'm just going to say no to menstrual cup. But over here, while we're talking about these things, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to put it out there. I'm just going to say that's just a hard pass for me. We can keep it moving. So we're talking about a conversation. This is going to be like a lot of the conversation today that wasn't previously really on social media. And you work in an industry now that are really advocating for changing this conversation. I first want to start by learning more about what inspired your move from radiation oncology to focusing on vulva care.
While it may not seem like a logical step forward, I had practiced for, upwards 20, 30 years. And first, what I want to say is I was impassioned and still love the practice of radiation oncology. For me, working with oncology patients is a privilege and an honor to be part of their lives and their families' lives as they go through this really terrifying journey is an honor. And I've always said throughout my practice, I get more from my patients than I will ever be able to give back to them, even as an oncologist. So I loved my practice. At a certain point, about 5 or 6 years ago, I did decide, though, that it was time for me to pivot and to maybe move out of the field of abject illness and move into an arena where I could be preemptive, educational. So, whereas my patient population heretofore were largely very sick people, I thought, okay, if I'm going to make a change, where can I be impactful? And in oncology, even though many of our patients come to us at a point where we're not talking about prevention or screening anymore, but I do always talk about that and the import of screening and doing what you can up front. So I've decided to morph to the other side of it where I can perhaps make an impact before people get to my end of things. So a lot of what I do is education, talking about what can be screened for, what is appropriate, and then talking about what is normal and what is not normal, and trying to make people aware of those differences because, especially in the vulva region, most people are not used to looking or talking about the skin of the vulva. So I have the opportunity to create a whole campaign of wellness and preemptive care through this company. So in an odd way, it seemed almost logical to me to move to the other side of the equation where I might be able to impact people's lives before they ended up in my office.
It totally makes sense. And specifically with your platform towards educating and then providing the products, and social media really plays a role in that arena, I think, when it comes to educating. And Dustin and I recently met with Sarah Reardon, the Vagina Whisperer, and we really spent some time talking about normalizing this conversation online.
Yeah, and I know Sarah very well, and I love Sarah, and we've been big supporters of what Sarah does, and specifically because it ties into what we do. And so I feel that we have really a very joint platform, and we are trying to impact the same communities. So have been a huge advocate, and Sarah too, of naming body parts as they are. So I say vulva. I say it loud, I say it proud. I say vagina. I say nose. I think we need to normalize that conversation and destigmatize it. And I think Sarah works very hard in that direction. And so do we. So we have a shared platform there. And so we talk about care, awareness, and body parts in a very destigmatized, normal fashion.
Very matter of fact.
Yes.
And part of what we were talking about with Sarah would be about tackling these conversations online because to you, they're normalized. And so as you're working on social, what has been, I think, your approach, first of all, to start normalizing it? How did you start?
I kind of started by jumping into the deep end. When I started doing this, I made the decision from the beginning I would use the term vulva. I would not stumble. I would not stutter over it. It would be as normal in my conversation as anything else. So that was, I think, shocking in some circles, but that was very intentional on my part when I started this. I wasn't going to ease into it and start with other terms because then the campaign doesn't work. You lose all cred and it's doing no one any favors. So that was a big part of what I did and was just jumping in, using the appropriate terms and talking very openly about the vulva and occasionally about the vagina because, of course, there are adjacent organs here. So, at first, even for me, going on social media live, but I stuck to those guns. Now, I don't even think twice about it. I'm really happy about that. And I want other people to feel that way too. I want no woman to ever stumble, or man, Dustin, but particularly women in talking about their vulvas or their vaginas because it should be as normal as talking about any other body parts so that you can go to your physician. I was always struck, and Dustin, you're a dermatologist. I was struck by how few women, one, knew the difference between their vulvas and vaginas. That was absolutely astounding to me as a woman. But two, how few women were familiar with them, understood them, or could talk about these body parts. I will never forget, I think a woman in her 30s, so young, came in and was absolutely aghast. There's something wrong. There's something wrong. And I said, okay, all right, let's let's take a look. I did a full exam, try as I might. I could find nothing wrong. This was a perfectly normal, healthy vulva. And I said, have you ever looked at your vulva? No. Okay, let's get a mirror. So I grabbed out a mirror and we actually did a vulva exam together, if you will. And I walked her through the parts of the vulva, showed her that it was normal, then encouraged her to start doing self-exams, but to use her hands and a mirror. Use what's available to you to get to know this body part the way you would any other body part. I've never forgotten that because that's what I'm up against. That's what I am trying to dismantle. So my goal when I first started this endeavor, and I've told my staff and everyone who works with me, okay, we are going to create a category called vulva. And they all kind of looked at me like, okay, well, there's feminine wellness, there's this, there's that. And I said, no, we are moving towards vulva as a category for just this reason, so that it is normalized and that when you have an issue or you want to participate in vulva care, you have a resource. So that's kind of how I broke into this. And that is still what I am trying to tackle. And I'm happy to say that my team tells me vulva as a search on Amazon is actually up 1,000% since 2023. I'd like to take credit for that. I know there's a lot of other people doing really important work in this field too. So I'm not sure I can fully take credit, but it was one of my goals. And I'm very excited to see that really kind of moving into the fore.
Yeah, this reminds me of the marketing concept of the red ocean versus the blue ocean. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept or not, but you want to be swimming in a blue ocean, not one that's filled with blood already, where everybody else is, all the other predators are. And you've kind of created a category of one, it sounds like, where you found a niche, even though there are products in industries adjacent to that, they go by feminine wellness or other things. And so you really carved out a completely new niche, and is probably to your credit in business and marketing, and also just understanding that the education part is so important.
It's important and it's so powerful.
And this may be more of a logistical question, but when I see videos on social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, and people are talking about the intimate parts of the body, they'll sometimes whisper them or they'll change their subtitles so that the word isn't on screen. And I think sometimes that's done because they're not comfortable saying them, but also sometimes these platforms may be censoring certain words. And have you run into any obstacles talking about these things on social media where the platforms and their community guidelines have become an obstacle to getting your educational message across?
Thanks, Dustin. It's a great question. Yes, early on, it was much more of an issue because no one had done it before. And so we had a lot of back and forth with a number of the platforms about using these words. And we have slowly but surely been able to move forward. So it's a testament, I think, to us and our drive to do it. But I'm also cheered that it means our audiences are also willing to accept this. And so it's a revolution of sorts, if you will. And I like to think that we are creating a wave. I want to be at the top of the wave, but there's a lot of competition. There's other people coming in the field, and I welcome them if they do it responsibly. And that's the other thing that I am constantly working on is, I don't use depictions of the vulva or vagina as flowers or shells or fruit or anything else, because I don't know about the rest of the women out there, but that's not what I've got. And I don't think anyone else does. And so that's a disservice to this community, is that kind of depiction. And it's like whispering. It's telling you that what you have isn't normal because we have to say it's a rose. Well, that's just not true. So those are the barriers that we continue to break down. But we've created a lot of success, and I'm really proud of that. It didn't start that way. We did at first have to tiptoe a bit, but now I just go on and I use words that are appropriate, and I don't mince them, as you might say.
I like that. Could you comment at all on how you worked with the platforms to get around the obstacles that they put up? Because many creators on social media find that it's very difficult to get help from the platforms themselves. Customer service from Meta or from TikTok is sometimes completely unobtainable, it seems. How were you able to navigate that and get in communication with somebody at the platforms and help them understand why it's important to be direct in our language.
It's not as easy as one might think. It's not a phone call away. Many times, what you end up doing is just doing it and seeing what the reaction from the platform is. And that's when you are able to then create a conversation, because it's one of those don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So when you can't get a response or it's nebulous, you either make the decision that you aren't going to do it, or you say, I am going to do it, accept the consequences, ask for forgiveness later. But that's when you begin to have a conversation. That's when you're able, when you get slapped on the hand, oh, by the way, this is why we're doing that. And this is what our goal is. And I think you'll find that your followers are actually wanting this. They are hungry for this knowledge and to be treated with respect. So that is largely how we've navigated that is, all right, well, let's just try it. And if we get pulled down, they'll invite us back. We'll get back on, but we'll know what they won't let us do. And I continue to push those envelopes. And it's not for shock value, I mean, there's nothing shocking about saying I have a growth on my nose. Nobody falls off the floor about that. So it is part of pushing to normalize these conversations.
Also on the platforms, though, there are challenges with even doing before and afters to some respect and different kinds of treatments. And I think it's really important for HCPs or people in the medical field to be able to advocate for their area, their specialty, their expertise, to be able to have that platform, because it is democratizing information and education, specifically in a sea of misinformation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Social media is not quite ready. That envelope we haven't been able to really push through, but we continue to try. We had some initial packaging. Our packaging, I had put a raised vulva on our boxes and then arrows to the very subtle but beautiful to the anatomic parts. And a lot of retailers were not ready for that. And so we learned that way. But yeah, we continue to push. And when I get pushed too far back, then you have to regroup, always keeping in mind, how do I get back to this point? Because I don't want to lose the ability to use the power of social media, because I believe it is where most people these days go to get education, go to get product recommendation, go to get news. So you can say whatever you want. But for me, throwing up my hands and saying they won't let me do everything that I want to do, so I'm not going to use that platform, that doesn't make sense, because I lose the ability to impact such a large group of people that benefit from what we are trying to do. So sometimes you do have to take a step back to go 2 steps forward. And I am really learning that. And I'm kind of full throttle. So for me, that is really difficult. But I have to keep in mind, what is my end goal? What am I trying to achieve? Who am I trying to benefit? It's not about me. It's about every woman out there. So I continue to push limits, pull back if I have to, but then try to go further again. And that's because I know this sounds corny, but I really do care. I don't have to work anymore. I don't have to do this. But in my heart, I felt I was not done. And I really wanted to do something that benefited the community and specifically women. So I keep pushing.
I think that's an important lesson for our audience as well, because where most of our audience is going to be healthcare professionals, and some of them will be tackling more complex topics than others, it's important to know where to push, when to step back, and how to have that strategy and the persistence that you've demonstrated on social media. But it's not only been, your message getting out there on your Instagram, but the brand that you use. You've also partnered with a lot of other creators in that process to help educate, using other people that have a platform that they built. How do you identify the types of creators or influencers that you like to work with as a brand to also help share this message?
Oh, thanks, Dustin. And that also has been a learning experience. Once again, entrepreneurship and what we're doing here, they don't teach you in medical school. I think you and I could agree on that. So a lot of this has been trial and error, but I believe in it enough to keep going. So sometimes people come to us, and we have found that more and more as we gain some popularity and voice. we have people actually coming to us and organically doing things on social media, which for me is always very fulfilling because I feel that a lot of especially the healthcare providers, they're not doing this because they're getting paid or they're getting free product. They're doing it because they actually believe in the same kind of things that I believe in, that my team believes in. So that's one avenue. Occasionally, we have approached other people that we admire, that we think, like Sarah Reardon. It turns out she was already recommending our products, but then we were able to support her. So oftentimes the people that we want to partner with are either already partnered with us, just not visibly, or really like what we're doing and want to get on board. Like, oh yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing. And so this is great because we have a synergy here. And that's been, I think, our most successful partnerships are people, whether it's people like Sarah, physicians who are already sending a message.
They're already recommending you organically.
Yeah, they're already sending a message, and then we see how synergistically we can work together to strengthen a co-message. And I really love those partnerships because we're learning things about them, they're learning things about us, but together we are sending twice as much information and power to our audiences.
Yeah, that's very important. And when you've done these partnerships, I'm sure some have gone better than others. How have these types of collaborations grown your brand as a whole? Or maybe how do you measure that?
Yes, there are collaborations that go better than others. Some, they just fizzle out. They're not reaching the same audience as we are. They're not as strong of advocates for the same things we advocate. But when you find partners where it really sparks and what you're doing really resonates one with the other, those are the partnerships that seem to prevail and that we build on. And we'll talk obviously offline to see what are you doing now? Oh my God, that fits in so well with what we're doing. Let's do something together on that front. So I think those are the ones. And frankly, you don't know which partnership is going to be successful when you go into it. And again, it evolves. And when it's a common ethos, those are the ones that seem to be strong and move forward and gain momentum. But it's definitely trial and error. We've had some experience where the ones we thought were just going to be like, oh, this couldn't miss.
No brainer, right?
Right. And then others where you thought, well, I don't know. All of a sudden, it's just so strong and powerful and reaches so many people. So that's always exciting. And it's kind of an unknown when you go in. And that's part of the fun of it, but also a lot of the challenge.
And that, speaks to the message of entrepreneurship. It's a risk anytime you do anything, whether it's starting a business, developing a new product, or having a partnership with another creator on social media. And from my perspective, this is a message that echoes very well with many things we've talked about on the podcast before, that for physician creators out there who are interested in partnering with brands, the best way to get on the brand's radar and to maintain that authenticity with your audience is to be a true fan of the brand and talk about it long before a partnership is ever in place. And that's something that I've tried to do as well in my content, and have turned down many, many partnerships that weren't a good fit, or turned them down until I've used the product for quite a while and then felt comfortable talking about it, because you want it to really maintain the authenticity for the brand, for the creator, and for the audience.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with that more. We do not pay people to say good things about our brand, especially those who have never used it. And I think that gets to the core of it. We want people advocating for the same things that we do. And if it happens to be for our brand, I want them to be as big a fan of the brand as I am. I used these products in my radiation practice. They're amazing skin products before I kind of pivoted to doing this full time. But, pelvic radiation for a woman, there's a lot of changes that nobody talks about, that nobody knows about going into it. And so the changing the feel of the tissues, the moisture of the tissues, there's strictures, which is kind of like scarring or clamping down for our audience. Those are huge challenges for women with pelvic radiation. And so, again, as a physician, I was aware of these. A lot of patients didn't know. A lot of other doctors don't know what we do and what the upshot of post radiation is, because it's kind of in a black box. Most people have no idea what we do down there in the basement with our linear accelerators. So, yeah, it's one of the things that drove me into this, is because there was so little knowledge for women and even other providers about vagina, vulva. So it was, for me, a really nice segue of being able to create product lines, but also a huge focus for me is education and empowerment of women via this.
I think this is a message that resonates with a lot of our listeners that we talk about all of the time, of doing things for the right reason. And for you, you mentioned that you don't have to work, you didn't have to, but this is a choice because you care, you wanted to help, you wanted to educate. And now you have this platform, which is exactly why Dustin has his platform, because he wants to educate and provide value to his community. One other thing that I would love to ask before we wrap up is, so someone is a physician, they could be in practice for 30 years, they have an idea. What advice would you give them about starting a brand? They have a dream. Maybe they don't have the products yet, but as we mentioned, and they don't teach you about business per se in med school because they're focusing on the medicine. But what advice would you give to somebody who's listening that said, you know what, I'm also a physician and I have this idea for a product or a brand or a service, whatever it may be? What should they do?
Well, from my perspective, I think the number one thing that you have to ask yourself deep inside before starting is, am I really passionate about this? Is this something I am willing to live, sleep, dream? And if the answer is yes, then you take the next step, and it's something I've had to learn. So what I would say is, I went into this not understanding this at all, but thinking it was important and really wanting to do it. But as it grew and I grew with this business, what I recognize is not everyone succeeds. And the metric of success has to be very personal. So if you think you're doing something really good and you believe in it and you are passionate about it, that's what has to move you forward. Because no matter how good your products are, no matter how good you are, no matter how great your idea, there are a gazillion other people with great, good ideas. And so you have to believe in this enough that you keep going, and you will get knocked down, but you got to pick yourself up again if it's really what you want to do. It has to matter to you. And so there's a lot of paths you can take where it's prescribed. And as I say, no pun intended, but where if you do the work, you get where you're going. Entrepreneurship, starting a company, starting a business, it's not like that. No matter how much you want it, you can't wish it true. So I guess that's what I would say to people. If this is truly a dream, it's really what you want to do, don't let someone tell you that it's stupid or you can't do it. There are times when you just can't succeed. And believe me, in our company here, there's been times when I wondered, could I keep going? Not personally, but was there enough happening that I could justify moving the company continually forward? And you have to believe enough and keep going and understand that there will be pitfalls. You will run into things you never imagined. And it's hard. It's also the challenge. And then there's the successes that come. And the successes, as I say, are largely personally defined. Like, being able to say vulva live on air. This is a huge success for me, you guys. I mean, this is new. This never happened. So that's a success for me. That's how I define that I've been successful in this endeavor. And if this becomes normal dinner table conversation, just like you would say, oh my gosh, my wrist is really bothering me, I think I need to see the orthopedic surgeon. We're not quite there yet. It's not Thanksgiving discussion, but we're moving that needle. And for me, that's huge success. So I would say to anyone moving down this path, believe in yourself, believe in what you're doing, but truly believe it. Be passionate, because that's the only way to get where you're going when you start something.
I think that's incredible advice and a great way to leave that with our audience. And for those that may not be familiar with you, Dr. Clare, where can they find you on social media?
So we are on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, at Medicine Mama. And I would love for anyone who's interested, please just take a look. see what we're doing, see if there's something that resonates with you about what we're doing and saying.
Well, we'll make sure to share the link to Medicine Mama on all the social platforms in the podcast show notes for this episode. And I've enjoyed this conversation and appreciate you taking your time to share about your brand journey, about your personal journey, and for the listeners to continue to hear that message of authenticity in their social media content and be willing to push barriers. And we thank all of our listeners for joining us on this episode. We appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star review on any podcast player that you are tuning in from, and give us a follow on Instagram as well at MedCreator101. Send us your messages and your questions, and we'd love to answer them for you. And we can't wait to see you all on the next episode.